Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 7 Part 21 based on novel. So let's start. In the darkness, Ling Qingzhu's moving figure suddenly froze. Her bright eyes were no longer as calm as before. Instead, a rich disbelief had taken its place. Her emotions, which only surfaced rarely just like the blossoming of the epiphyllum flower, suddenly arose at this moment because of a single name uttered by her companions. Lindong. It was an ordinary name. However, it stirred violent ripples in Ling Qingzhu's calm lake-like heart. She would never forget what happened 4 years ago in that tiny Great Yang Empire. Over the past 4 years, she had buried that incident deep within her heart. Along with it, she had also buried the one called Lindong in the deepest recesses of her heart and tried to forget about him with the passage of time. However, despite burying it for 4 years, everything had been completely awakened with that name at this moment. The scene from 4 years ago also flooded out from the deepest parts of her mind, and was still so vivid. After what had happened back then, even with Ling Qingzhu's character, she was secretly filled with shame, rage and killing intent towards him. She had once contemplated killing Lindong in order to wipe this incident clean forever. Of course, she did not do that in the end. Perhaps it was because of the steely metal the immature youth had displayed back then, while he was being pressured by a far stronger Lin Langtian, that had touched her. Or she was actually a kind person deep in her bones. Or it could be due to other reasons she was unaware of. In the end, she chose to let Lindong off and even saved him from Wang Yang. Perhaps only she knew just how complicated her emotions were back then. Ling Qingzhu still remembered the youth's disheveled yet exceptionally bright expression back on that mountain peak when he proclaimed to her that he would surpass Lin Langtian, and that ruffian-like tone when he declared that when he appeared in front of her once again, he would tell her that any woman that he slept with would be his. At that time, Ling Qingzhu did not believe his words. She very clearly knew how weak Lindong was, and the distance between them was far beyond his imagination. After all, she was a member of a super sect and he was merely a branch family member from a low-rank empire. The two of them belonged to completely different worlds. If nothing unexpected happened in this world, the two of them would never have met. Ling Qingzhu did not mention this back then. In the face of the youth's bold promise, perhaps she could only treated it as a joke in her heart, or the right of frivolous youth. Ling Qingzhu knew that once she left Great Yang Empire, this incident would be buried forever in her memories. Perhaps she may not even step foot into that empire ever again and would gradually forget everything that happened and the people there. Even the young man called Lindong. This was what she had secretly believed until that name once again resounded in her ears. Only then did she realize that all her suppressed memories were still as vivid as before. That pitifully weak youth who was once forced into such a sorry state by Lin Langtian's aura, that youth who was forced into a perilous situation by Wang Yang. He had finally walked out of the tiny Great Yang Empire and rose above the rest in the 100 Empire War. He had actually delivered on the promises that he had made back then. The gauze on her face gently trembled as Ling Qingzhu gently bit her red lips. A complicated expression flowed in her bright and clear eyes. She could only imagine the effort and price Lindong must have paid in order to reach this level. This guy, the steely metal that had touched her back then, seemed to have not changed at all. Senior Qingzhu? What is it? Behind Ling Qingzhu, the other girls were also startled when she suddenly stopped. Promptly, they cautiously asked. Ling Qingzhu gently lifted her head and breathed in an icy-cold breath of air through her gauze. As the cold flowed through her heart, she used it to suppress the surging emotions within. It's nothing. Ling Qingzhu softly said. She leaned back her head and turned her eyes to the back, as if she wanted to see through space and catch a glimpse of that familiar figure again. Moments later, she finally turned around, gently clenching her slender jade-like hand. No longer hesitating, the green lotus beneath her feet flickered, before it transformed into a meteor and flew out. Lindong, it is indeed surprising that you can make it here. However, now that you are here, you will finally understand the gap between us. I am not looking down on you. The fact that you can reach such a stage is more than enough proof of your talent. However, this alone is still not enough for you to utter those words you had said previously before me. You are the first man to have taken my body. If you are truly capable, make yourself the last. However, it is not so simple to conquer me, Ling Qingzhu. Hopefully, you will have the genuine qualifications to utter those words in front of me the next time we meet in the Eastern Xian region. Regardless of the outcome, at the very least, I admire your courage and conviction. She's gone. Atop the 100 Empire Mountain, Lin Dong stared at the spot where Ling Qingzhu vanished as his lips gently pressed together, and his originally surging heart gradually calmed down. However, he did not feel anxious. Since he had reached the Eastern Xian region, he believed that he would have the opportunity to meet her again in future. The currently Ling Qingzhu is quite powerful. Little Martin casually said. From what I can tell, she should have reached the peak of Nirvana stage and she is merely one step away from the life and death stage. Peak of the Nirvana stage. Lin Dong's pupils shrunk a little before he involuntarily sighed in his heart. She was truly a lady blessed by the heavens. In merely 4 years, she had improved tremendously. Her progress made even himself feel as if there was no chance of catching up. Heh, I believe in you. I believe it will be quite satisfying to conquer such a lady. Little Martin patted Lin Dong's shoulder before he laughed in a strange manner. Lin Dong rolled his eyes at him. Oh? Is brother Lin Dong interested in Ling Qingzhu? While Lin Dong and Little Martin spoke, Liu Bai clearly saw the direction Lin Dong had been staring at. Immediately, he asked with a twinkly smile. Do you know her? Lin Dong was somewhat startled as he asked. Is there anyone in Eastern Xian region who does not know Ling Qingzhu of the Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace? She is the direct disciple of the Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace Empress and she holds an extraordinary status. Furthermore, her looks are out of this world and countless geniuses from various super sects have a crush on her. It is a pity that no one has been able to peel off her gauze and peek at her beauty. Liu Bai laughed. There was an unconcealable passion in his words as he spoke. Lin Dong scratched his nose in an unnatural manner while a peculiar expression filled his eyes. Not only did he peel off her gauze and saw her face, he even... When he thought of that absurd deed that happened back then, even someone like Lin Dong involuntarily felt a slight heat in his heart. To a man, there was nothing more satisfying in this world than conquering an ice queen. Of course, Lin Dong was not dumb enough to mention this incident. Even though he had stood out in the 100 Empire War, there was still an extremely huge gap between him and the direct disciples of the super sects. If news that he had defiled this goddess got out, several of Ling Qingzhu's admirers would come hunting for him. So she is from Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. Nonetheless, Lin Dong managed to uncover Ling Qingzhu's background from Liu Bai. He had never expected that she was someone from Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. In a manner of speaking, Lin Dong had quite a strong affinity with this sect. In fact, back in Great Yang Empire, he even managed to obtain a Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace's martial art from that fellow. With these thoughts in mind, Lin Dong involuntarily chuckled before he stretched his back. When his eyes once again turned to look at that spot where Ling Qingzhu vanished, a small smile appeared on his face. Meanwhile, a tiny bit of anticipation gushed out from his heart. Ling Qingzhu, you had better be careful if we meet once again. The super sect experts above the 100 Empire Mountain slowly descended after the battle came to an end, before finally coming to rest in the skies above the mountaintop. The commotion on the mountaintop immediately died down when everyone saw this, and a passionate look burned in the eyes of many. Evidently, they were aware of what was going to happen next. Everyone, I think that there is no need to continue this 100 Empire war until the end this time around, is there? Wu Dao beamed as he looked at the mountain top, before looking towards the remaining experts from the various super sects. The final Nirvana Golden Ranking battle is merely to select the most outstanding champion. I think that there is already someone suitable for that spot, no? The expert from the Great Desolate Palace also nodded and laughed. From the side, some of the other experts from the super sects also nodded slightly upon hearing this. After which, their gazes turned downwards in unison and finally gathered onto a tall young figure below. Liu Tong's eyebrows knitted together slightly. Qin Tian's failure to obtain the champion spot was now somewhat out of his hands. However, there was nothing he could say at this moment. He had declared earlier that the person who could stop the formation would become the champion. There was no way for him to take back his words. The so-called 100 Empire War champion might appear to be just an empty title, but it was quite important to their super sects. This was because according to the rules, the super sect that the champion joined would be able to gain the largest number of disciples in the 100 Empire War. If one wished to ensure the continuous prosperity of one sect, the pouring in of new blood was critical. These geniuses that stood out in the 100 Empire War all possessed extremely outstanding talent. Their enlistment into any sect would be of extremely beneficial for a sect's long-term prospects. Although the selection of disciples from the 100 Empire War was merely one of the means for these super sects to recruit disciples, it was obvious that no sect would find having too many of them a bother. Over the years, the 8 super sects had argued frequently on the distribution of the disciples recruited in the Eastern Xian region. It was also due to these arguments that some rules had been made. An example was this 100 Empire War. It used the champion sect selection to decide which super sect could obtain the most disciples. If one divided the disciple resource in the 100 Empire War into 10, the sect which the champion joined would be able to get another portion on top of their original portion. This was basically double of the other sects. The victors of the last couple of 100 Empire Wars were mostly from the Qianyuan Empire. As a faction under the Yuan Gate, these champions would naturally join the Yuan Gate without exception. This had also allowed the Yuan Gate to become the greatest beneficiary from the 100 Empire War. However, this time around, the appearance of Lin Dong had upset the situation. Even Liu Tong did not dare to guarantee that Lin Dong would choose to join the Yuan Gate. Although their Yuan Gate was truly the strongest super sect in the Eastern Xian region, Liu Tong felt a faint unease regarding Lin Dong. The eyes of the 8 super sect experts hovering in the air were currently gathered onto Lin Dong below them. Even the gazes from the surrounding mountaintops also turned as all of them gathered on Lin Dong. The sudden arrival of every gaze in this place caused Lin Dong to be stunned. Only then did he sense that this champion spot was not as simple as he had imagined. Lin Dong, which super sect do you intend to join? Wu Dao smilingly stared at Lin Dong. That friendly tone made Lin Dong's hairs stand a little. Wu Dao's voice had just barely faded when the remaining 7 pairs of eyes focused even more intently at Lin Dong. With such a lineup staring at him, even Lin Dong could not help but feel a little uneasy despite his character. He was merely a disciple who wished to join a super sect. There was no need to put such terrifying attention on him, right? By the side, little Martin narrowed his eyes slightly as he watched this scene. The selection of a super sect was very important. This was because Lin Dong needed to train there for a period of time after this. Once one joined a super sect, one's body would be imprinted with the brand of this sect. The competition between the sects of the Eastern Xian region was extremely intense. They were all large boats, and if a large boat overturned, the disciples within it would also end up in an incomparably miserable fate. From what one could tell of the current situation within the Eastern Xian region, the Yuan Gate was definitely the strongest. Hence, it was likely that the resources it had would also surpass the other super sects. If one trained in the Yuan Gate, one would be treated rather well, and perhaps even have a rather bright future. Of course, little Martin greatly disliked this strongest super sect of the Eastern Xian region. The celestial demon Martin and the Yuan Gate were bitter enemies. The ancestors of both parties had been killed by the other side. Therefore, he personally did not wish for Lin Dong to join the Yuan Gate. Of course, if Lin Dong still chose them in the end, little Martin would not object. Amongst the remaining 7 super sects, the Dao sect was a pretty good option. Of course, if Lin Dong wished to be closer to Ling Qingshu, joining the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace was also not bad. Lin Dong's physical body was also quite strong, and the Great Desolate Palace was widely known for their powerful physical bodies. Lin Dong's mental energy also seemed to be quite decent, and the Divine Sect focused on mental energy cultivation. When little Martin thought about it, he suddenly felt a little strange as he discovered that Lin Dong, this jack of all trades, seemed to have quite a number of super sects that he could choose to join. While these thoughts were running through little Martin's mind, Lin Dong also frowned a little. Countless people around were quietly staring at him. Their eyes contained an envy that was somewhat difficult to hide. If these people wanted to join a super sect, they would have to see if the other party wanted to accept them. However, he had it easy. All of these super sects could only watch and wait for him to make his choice. The top of the mountain was silent for a moment before Lin Dong finally raised his head. After which, he respectfully cupped his hands towards the 8 people in the sky and said, "Elders, Lin Dong wishes to join the Tao sect." Clamor. Lin Dong's words undoubtedly stirred a commotion on the mountaintop. Quite a number of people were stunned. They clearly did not expect that Lin Dong would choose the Tao sect. Although the Tao sect was not considered as the weakest amongst the 8 super sects, it was also not considered to be the strongest. Moreover, the Tao sect has the least disciples amongst the 8 super sects. From a certain point of view, its reputation was inevitably a little inferior. Therefore, many people were unable to comprehend why Lin Dong would give up the strongest Yuan gate and join the Tao sect. Lin Dong also felt a little helpless in the face of the surrounding commotion. The Yuan gate was indeed extremely powerful. If he joined, he would indeed possess an extremely strong backer. However, it was clearly impossible for Lin Dong to do so due to Little Martin. Moreover, once Little Martin's identity was revealed and the Yuan gate wanted to attack him, Lin Dong would definitely help Little Martin given his character. Therefore, he might even be expelled and hunted by the Yuan gate. Since that was the case, why would he enter and go looking for trouble? As for the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace, it was also quite powerful. However, Ling Qingzhu was there. Moreover, her status was definitely extremely high. Should Lin Dong enter with a disciple status, it would not be befitting of the arrogant words he had once spoken in front of her. Lin Dong could imagine just how awkward it would be after meeting Ling Qingzhu there as a disciple of the 9 Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. After some thought, Lin Dong had also eliminated the Great Desolate Palace and the Divine Sect. Therefore, after much pondering, it appeared that the Tao sect was most suitable for him, although that old fellow Wu Dao seemed to have some intention of cheating him. The expressions of the 8 super sect experts in the air were interesting after they heard Lin Dong's choice. Wu Dao's smiling face appeared as though it was a blooming flower. The remaining people had regretful faces. Only Liu Tong had a dark look flashing across his eyes. Lin Dong had given up the Yuan gate and chose the Tao sect. This had undoubtedly caused him to lose a great amount of face. It was unavoidable for him to be reprimanded for his bad performance when he returned this time around. Lin Dong, this decision is no trifling matter, and it concerns your future. Do not end up making a mistake that you will regret for the rest of your life. Liu Tong faintly spoke. Everyone could hear some fury and a hidden threat in his voice. Lin Dong's eyes hardened and felt some displeasure in his heart. Liu Tong was a little too narrow-minded. If the Yuan gate were filled with such people, it would be far better not to join them. Liu Tong, choosing a sect is an individual's decision. These words of yours are really a little shameful. Wu Dao raised his eyes and said, "Your Yuan gate might be strong, but my Dao sect is also no pushover. Back then, a single disciple of my path sect could charge into your Yuan gate and kill 3 great elders alone. How is such capability weak? Wu Dao, you actually dare to bring this matter up?" Liu Tong's expression changed drastically as he cried furiously. What this old man said is the truth. What can you do to me? Wu Dao's eyes also suddenly turned dark and cold at this moment. He stared at Liu Tong and slowly replied. Humph, Wu Dao, that evil creature back then was someone from your Dao sect Desolate Hall. Looks like your Desolate Hall still bears a grudge regarding this matter. If you are unhappy, you can come looking for us. That evil thing even forced our sect master to intervene, so at least he should be satisfied with his death. Liu Tong's expression was cold and stern as he spoke. You still dare to utter such nonsense? This old man shall cripple you today. A savage expression surged up on Wu Dao's face at this moment. He suddenly took a step forward as monstrous Yuan power immediately swept out. His Yuan power was extremely strange. It was as though it contained an extremely powerful energy. It rose endlessly while it fluctuated, appearing to be filled with an endless amount of vitality. Mysterious life stage? Liu Tong was clearly also able to sense Wu Dao's bizarre yuan power. His pupils immediately shrunk tightly as he also cried out in fury, "Cripple me! You dare!" A similarly incomparably majestic yuan power surged out from within Liu Tong's body after the cry sounded out. Although it was inferior to Wu Dao, it was also extremely frightening. The atmosphere in the sky instantly became hostile. Everyone on the mountaintop watched the two people from the two super sects that had suddenly turned on each other, as a chill ran through their hearts. After which, numerous eyes turned towards Lin Dong. This fellow was really someone who caused trouble wherever he went. Majestic yuan power rippled in the sky, accompanied by an endless pressure as it spread. Under this pressure, everyone on the mountaintop felt the yuan power within their bodies begin to show signs of solidifying, immediately causing shock to arise in their hearts. As expected of the super sect experts, just their pressure alone was already so powerful. Wu Dao and Liu Tong faced each other in the sky, dark and cold look in their eyes. One could faintly see murderous desire surface within their eyes. It was very difficult to imagine that these two had joined forces to fight the experts from the Western Xian region not long ago. Now, however, they showed signs that they were about to meet on the battlefield. Lin Dong was also a little stunned when he saw this scene. Clearly, he also did not expect that the two of them would turn against each other so quickly. Moreover, it was obvious from their expressions that they would not hold back at all. "Looks like there is something amiss between the Yuan Gate and the Dao sect," Lin Dong softly muttered. If that fellow from back then was allowed to grow smoothly, he would definitely be a giant-like existence now. Such a loss was truly like cutting off the flesh of the Dao sect. Do you think that kind of genius with both unparalleled talent and character was so easy to find? Lin Dong nodded slightly. He did not know much about that legendary ruthless senior from Dao sect. Therefore, he was unaware of just how powerful this person would be now if he was allowed to live. However, from little Martin's words, he could vaguely understand a little. After all, there were not many people who could get little Martin, this proud fellow, to say such words. Why did that senior charge up to the Yuan Gate? Why did the chief of the Dao sect sit back and let him be killed by the Yuan Gate? Lin Dong could not help but ask. I am also not very certain about what happened back then. After all, it was a matter that occurred in the Eastern Xian region. However, even if the chief of the Dao sect was to intervene, it was likely impossible to rescue that fellow. It was not without reason that the Yuan Gate could become the strongest super sect within the Eastern Xian region. Otherwise, my celestial demon Martin tribe would have long charged over and killed all of them. Little Martin laughed coldly. Lin Dong fondled his chin. He had merely came from a low-rank empire and he only possessed some vague perception about those super sects that had only existed in the legends in the past. Hence, he was truly unable to tell just how strong they were. When Lin Dong was softly conversing with little Martin, the atmosphere in the mid-air also became increasingly tense. However, just when the aura of the two rose to the peak, the experts from the remaining super sects at the side finally opened their mouths. You two, now is the time to select disciples. The both of you are also considered as elders within your own sects. Doing such an impulsive thing will give these disciples a bad impression. The one who spoke first was the pretty lady from the Nine Heavens Supreme Purity Palace. Her eyebrows were slightly vertical. She appeared quite elegant. Ha ha, that's right. It is not good for the both of you to fight here. Since Lin Dong has chosen to join the Dao sect, we will naturally allow him to follow his desire. Saying anything else will only make us seem too narrow-minded. That old man, who was carrying a sword case on his back, also laughed faintly. The remaining experts from the super sects at the side also nodded upon hearing this, indicating their agreement. A deep expression flashed in the depth of Liu Tong's eyes when he saw this. He was aware that the other super sects were upset over the fact that their Yuan Gate had monopolized the past few hundred Empire War champions. Now that it was possible for them not to allow the Yuan Gate to become the greatest beneficiary from this 100 Empire War, all of these fellows were happy to quietly add insult to injury. Humph. Although Liu Tong felt displeased within his heart, he also understood that it was impossible to alter the situation. All he could do was to let out a cold snort. He swung his sleeve and withdrew the majestic Yuan power into his body. After which, he stared at Wu Dao in a dark and cold manner. He said, "Forget it. It is difficult for your Dao sect to stand out. We shall give in to you this time around. However, I'm afraid that you will teach your disciples wrongly and end up ruining their future. There is no need for you to worry about it." Wu Dao spoke in a faint voice. "Hey, you should wait until the next great sect competition before uttering those words. I'm afraid that you will end up losing quite a number of young Dao sect geniuses at that time." Liu Tong laughed. Wu Dao's expression immediately sunk when he heard this. The Great Sect Competition was a place where the various super sects in the Eastern Xian region used actual battle to train their disciples. The Dao sect was specifically targeted by the Yuan Gate during these years. Quite a number of talented striking disciples were attacked viciously by the young experts from the Yuan Gate during the Great Sect Competition. This had ended up resulting in quite a great loss for the Dao sect. Liu Tong looked at Wu Dao's dark and sunken expression. Only then did his heart feel a little better. He waved his sleeves and coldly said, "All right, let's not talk nonsense. Hurry up and choose the disciples." Wu Dao ruthlessly stared at Liu Tong. After which, he turned his eyes away. His gaze looked towards the mountain top and he spoke in a deep voice, "Those present who are willing to join my Dao sect should release their aura. Those who are not willing only need to keep their aura in their bodies." Some commotion was emitted on the mountain top after Wu Dao's voice sounded. Soon after waves of auras surged out. Only a minority kept their auras. No matter how one put it, the Dao sect could also be considered one of the better-ranked super sect within the Eastern Xian region. Hence, it was quite a good opportunity to join them. Wu Dao looked at this scene before his expression became a little warmer. After which, he shook his sleeves. A large curtain of light appeared. Finally, they transformed into numerous light pillars that covered some of the stronger human figures on the mountaintop one after another. Lin Dong watched Wu Dao, who was beginning to select disciples. He mused for a moment before suddenly looking at Mo Ling, Liu Bai, and the others. He asked, "Are all of you willing to join the Dao sect?" Mo Ling and the rest were startled upon hearing this. They immediately spoke in a somewhat embarrassed manner, "We are not considered top-notch in this place. Even if we wish to join the Dao sect, it will depend on whether the other party is willing to accept us." Dao sect was also one of the 8 super sects. Why would they not want to join them? However, they were after all not Lin Dong and were not able to choose. All they could do was to wait for those experts from the super sects to select them. Lin Dong smiled. He was going to head to the super sect next. That place was a foreign land and it was boring for him to go alone. If he could bring Mo Ling, Liu Bai, and the rest along, they could be considered a team. It was always good to have more people no matter where one went. Moreover, he and Mo Ling trio came from the Great Yang Empire and they had managed to fight all the way to this place with much difficulty. Naturally, he did not wish to see them fail to be selected. Additionally, if he could bring the 3 of them into the Dao sect and word of it was to be transmitted back to the Great Yang Empire, it was likely that the royal family of the Great Yang Empire and the others should know how to repay this favor. Just when Lin Dong was preparing to speak to Wu Dao, a light pillar from the sky had already fell, covering Mo Ling, Liu Bai, Yang Sen, Mu Hongling and the rest within it. This old fellow. The corner of Lin Dong's mouth was lifted into a smile when he saw this scene. It seemed that this old Wu Dao was constantly focusing on him. This old man was interesting. From the looks of it, he was clearly thinking of repaying some of Lin Dong's debt from before. Mo Ling and the rest also had excited faces. Their eyes were filled with gratitude when they looked at Lin Dong. All of them understood that if it was not because of Lin Dong, it would be quite difficult for them to join the Dao sect given their talent. I also want to join the Dao sect. Standing beside him, Zuru was a little anxious when she saw this scene. The young lady was unable to control her emotions. She immediately raised her hand and her big eyes looked at Wu Dao. That innocent manner caused quite a number of people to smile when looking at her. Wu Dao involuntarily laughed softly upon seeing this. He waved his sleeves and a light pillar headed towards Su Ruo. However, the light pillar had just shot out when it was suddenly shattered by a yuan power. Ha ha, Wu Dao, leave this little girl to my Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. She should be a little better off coming to my place. I wonder if you can do this favor for my Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. That pretty woman from the Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace stepped forward and spoke with a somewhat embarrassed face. Su Ru had caught her attention since the beginning. She was a little unable to control herself now that she saw this girl being about to be selected by Wu Dao. That was why she suddenly intervened. Wu Dao was also startled. He hesitated as he looked towards Lin Dong. I want to go to the Dao sect. Su Ruo's pretty face became a little anxious as she cried after seeing this scene. The pretty woman's figure moved and directly appeared in front of Su Ru. After which, she extended her hand and touched the latter's face while adopting a gentle expression. She smiled slightly and softly said, "Little girl, it is a good thing to chase after your lover. However, at times, pestering the other party too much will cause him to feel irritated. You are currently too weak. If you come to my Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace, you will definitely be able to become strong very quickly. Only then will you be able to capture a man's heart when you meet him in the future." Su Ru was merely a young girl who had yet to experience the world. How could she resist such words from this beautiful woman? Immediately, her face turned fiery hot. Her small hands forcefully entangled together. Clearly, she was at a huge loss. Standing beside her, Lin Dong did not hear what the pretty woman had said. However, he was happy that Su Ru was so highly valued by this expert from the Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace. Of course, he did not overdo it by saying anything else. He would still respect Su Ru's final decision. The words from the pretty woman in front of her earlier had clearly left a strong impression on her heart. After she hesitated for a long while with a boiling red face, she finally made up her mind and nodded. She timidly asked, "If I join the Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace, will my big brother be able to do so too?" Su Kuei, who was standing beside Su Ru, involuntarily rubbed his head in embarrassment when he heard Su Ru's words. Of course. A joy flashed across the pretty eyes of the beautiful woman when she saw Su Ru nodding as she immediately agreed to her request. Su Kuei's talent might not have caught her eye, but she was willing to overlook it in order to recruit Su Ruo. "Big brother Lin Dong, I will not be following you to the Dao sect. I will go to the Nine Heaven Supreme Purity Palace." Su Ruo turned her head before she summoned her courage and told Lin Dong. You should make your own decision. We will not be beside you when you train at that place. Therefore, you cannot act like before." Lin Dong smiled slightly. He extended his hand, rubbed Su Ru's head and said, "Understood." Su Ru's big eyes became a little red because of Lin Dong's words. Her eyes were filled with reluctance. Although she had experienced many dangerous battles after following Lin Dong's group and she would be occasionally scolded by little Martin, she was able to sense that everyone was treating her sincerely. The interior of the super sect is not as peaceful as you imagined. You should change that timid character of yours in the future. Do not come crying to us when the time comes. No one will bother about you. Little Martin still had that lazy manner that could anger a person to death. However, only a person familiar with him would be able to discover a little gentleness on his handsome demon-like face. Su Ru was clearly already used to this kind of impolite speech from little Martin. Moreover, she was also able to sense a kind of concern from it. She immediately nodded solemnly at his words. While they were chatting, Wu Dao in the sky had already finished his selection. Being the first sect which could select disciples, he had clearly gained a great benefit. Hence, his old face was filled with smiles. After he had completed his selection, the remaining 7 super sect experts finally began their selection. Light pillars immediately covered the sky. They were just like numerous light pillars that divided these geniuses from various empires on the mountain. Lin Dong could not resist smiling as he looked at the mountaintop which was covered by an excited atmosphere. He stretched his lazy waist and turned his head. His gaze leaped past the core region and looked towards the distant area that could not be reached. 1 year ago, those few people that had come from a low-rank empire had stumbled and charged into this ancient battlefield, where numerous experts gathered. At that time, they were the lowest existence in this battlefield. It was likely that even Lin Dong at that time was unable to imagine that he would ultimately surpass those geniuses that had come from the super empires and become the most dazzling existence in this 100-empire war. A smile was lifted on the corner of Lin Dong's mouth. He could already imagine just what kind of great storm it would cause in the Great Yang Empire when this news was transmitted back there. Curtains of light covered the 100-empire mountain top. Nearly everyone who could make it to the mountain top had a heaven-grade Nirvana seal, and most of them were fairly talented. Therefore, with the exception of a few individuals, most of them would be selected by the super sects. However, they would only become disciples after entering the super sects. If they wanted to improve and become direct disciples, they would still have to work rather hard. At this stage, the 100-empire war had officially concluded. However, this domain would remain open for a period of time. During this period, the super sects would continue to monitor this place. If there were other stellar performers, they would be accepted by the super sects. Of course, the disciples that were taken in during the second round would have a second marked in front of their names, and their status would be lower than ordinary disciples. Even though they were only branch disciples, it was still extremely desirable for most. After all, the super sects were extremely stringent. As the disciples were distributed, the 100-empire war officially came to an end. Lin Dong stood to one side, and a sea of black bobbed heads gathered behind him. All of them looked to him with respect and admiration. All of them were now disciples of Dao sect, and Lin Dong's status would definitely exceed them. Hence, regardless of what empire they came from, they no longer dared to act arrogantly in front of him. Now that the 100-empire war has ended, all of you will follow me to the Dao sect. News of what has happened here will swiftly spread back to your own respective empires. Meanwhile, the rewards from the Dao sect will soon be delivered to your empires. Wu Dao stared at that crowd before he stroked his beard and spoke. Wu Dao's words obviously caused grateful expressions to surface on many faces. All of them represented their empires to take part in the 100-empire war. Now that they had finally succeeded, when they thought of the joy that this news would bring to their own empires, all of them were overjoyed. There were countless empires in the Eastern Xian region, and many new empires were destroyed and created daily. Therefore, one way to judge the strength of an empire was by the number of members who had joined a super sect. Even though the super sects would not intervene in the wars between the empires, the disciples who had joined the super sects would be naturally unwilling to see their own empires be destroyed. Therefore, once their empires are in danger, those disciples would naturally come to their aid. Of course, it would be fine if those disciples merely held an ordinary status in the super sects. However, if those disciples were truly valued by their super sect would not ignore their plight as well. As such, their super sect would likely intervene as well. It was precisely because of this reason that the empires in the Eastern Xian region tried desperately to send members to the super sect in hopes of gaining their protection and ensure the longevity of their empires. After Wu Du spoke, his hand seals instantly changed. Majestic Yuan power quickly gathered in front of him before directly transforming into a giant formation a moment later. Brilliant rays of light swirled across his formation. All of the super sects had constructed a space imprint in the ancient battlefield, and they could activate it at will to send members back to their own sects. Lin Dong watched as the now complete formation as he involuntarily took in a deep breath. Was it finally time to go? Let's go. Regret lingered in his heart for a moment, before Lin Dong took the first step into the formation without any hesitation. Soon after, Little Martin, Little Flame and the rest quickly followed behind him. After the last individual stepped into the formation, the dazzling light began to flow. Lin Dong lifted his head and took one last peek at this domain. In the end, a trace of anticipation flowed deep within his eyes. Eastern Xian region, Super Sect San. Ling Qingshu. Lin Dong, am coming. Dazzling light exploded in the skies. When it reached its peak, it suddenly vanished, and as the light vanished, it took that crowd along as well. 1 year of hard work. The 100 Empire War had finally ended. Great Yang Empire, Imperial City. The smell of incense lingered across the quiet yet majestic imperial study, causing one to feel invigorated. In the middle of the study, a muscular figure was quietly browsing through the various documents on his desk. A faint yet powerful aura was emitted from his body. The fearsome tiger of the imperial family, Mo Jingtian, and the current ruler of the Great Yang Empire. After a year, his aura was clearly stronger than before. Bang! The serene study room was suddenly disrupted by an extremely piercing noise of the door opening. Mo Jingtian's face instantly darkened. He lifted his head and was just about to erupt in rage when a faint yet sharp voice was transmitted into his ears. "Your Majesty, the 100 Empire War is over." The rage on Mo Jingtian's face instantly disappeared together with his originally gloomy expression. He suddenly stood up, his voice a little shaky due to anxiety. "What about Mo Ling?" "Your Majesty, the third prince has been accepted by Dao sect, one of the 8 great super sects." The man was overjoyed as he replied in a trembling tone. "Dao sect?" Even a man like Mo Jingtian could not help but involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air as he stood in shock. There were many super sects in Eastern Xian region. However, he knew of the 8 strongest ones. He had originally thought that it would be great if Mo Ling could enter any of the super sects. However, Mo Ling was actually chosen by one of the 8 great super sects, the Dao sect. That was one of the largest factions in the entire Eastern Xian region. How is this possible? Mo Jingtian was so shocked that it took him a moment to recover. Promptly, he muttered to himself. He was clearly aware of the cruel nature of the 100 Empire War. In fact, there was no one who had accomplished such a feat ever since the founding of his Great Yang Empire. "Your Majesty, not only did the third prince join the Dao sect, even Diyun, Man Shan, and the rest have joined Dao sect." This sensational news stunned Mo Jingtian so greatly that he fell back into his seat. There was actually 3 members that had been selected by the Dao sect. Did that not mean that their Great Yang Empire now had 3 super sect members? How is this possible? Waves of disbelief continuously struck Mo Jingtian's heart. He stared at the messenger, his hand continuously toying with a jade ball, as he muttered to himself. "It is all because of Lin Dong." The messenger's face was still filled with an almost maniacal joy. Obviously, this was the most shocking news that he had received in his life. Lin Dong? That Lin Dong from the Lin clan. Mo Jingtian was startled as he said. He was crowned as the champion of this 100 Empire War and the Dao sect highly values him. That is why they decided to accept the third prince and the rest. Boom! That rare jade stone in Mo Jingtian's hand was instantly turned to dust. However, he had no time to feel any regret about it. As he stared in shock at the man in front of him, a single word continuously filled his mind. 100 Empire War. Champion? Mo Jingtian's palm gently trembled as he tugged his sleeves. At this moment, his pupils had unknowingly shrunk. He clearly knew what this title represented. This title represented the most capable younger generation member in the entire Eastern Xian region. In the past, such an individual typically came from super empire. Low-rank empires like them were basically treated as cannon fodder in the 100 Empire War. In fact, even surviving was a challenge. To contend for the championship spot would merely bring disgrace to themselves. However, a youth from their Great Yang Empire had stood out in the 100 Empire War and now stood at its peak. The shock caused by this news made Mo Jingtian unable to breathe. "Are you certain?" Mo Jingtian opened his dry mouth as he asked in a coarse voice. "Your Majesty, this is the Yuan spirit message sent by Dao sect." The man quickly took out a golden glowing ball. Within the golden glowing ball was a golden piece of paper. Mo Jingtian quickly received it. The imposing aura given off by the glowing globe caused the Yuan power in his body to solidify. He knew that his news was genuine. That kid, Mo Jingtian pursed his lips as an image of the scrawny young man from 1 year ago flashed past in his mind. At that time, he would not even have dreamt that Lin Dong would accomplish such a feat. Looks like it was a good move to ask Mo Ling and the rest to follow Lin Dong. A truly terrifying fellow has emerged from the Lin clan, Mo Jingtian solemnly sighed. There was an unconcealed envy within his words. Your Majesty, there has been quite a few skirmishes recently between the Lin clan and the Wang clan. Send word to the Wang clan, from this day on, the Lin clan is now the leader of the 4 great clans. If they do not know how to behave themselves, Mo Jingtian's eyes narrowed as a trace of killing intent slowly emerged. Yes. The messenger's heart was shocked. Looks like the Wang clan was truly unfortunate this time. In fact, was there anyone in the Great Yang Empire who would dare to oppose the Lin clan in future? Your Majesty, the Yuan spirit message should have also been sent to the Lin clan and the other factions in the empire. Mo Jingtian slowly nodded his head. He knew that from this day on, the Lin clan would become the most powerful faction in the empire. In fact, even their imperial family would not dare to do anything to them. Because the Lin clan had produced a Lin Dong. This video will end here.